Hello and welcome again to another special edition of the Business Education Tour. Today, we have a special guest coming from the accounting and tax industry in real estate. And I'm really excited to see the different perspective and insight that he will share with us. Sandro Bagnati is a well-known certified practicing accountant with over 30 years experience, and is also the former managing director of Shannon Naylor Melbourne. Sandro, thank you very much for joining this tour. And if we could start with a bit of your story, and how did you get started in your business?
Elaine, good morning, Elaine, and thank you for the introduction. Elaine, I've had over 40 years of experience in the accounting industry. I actually started as most young accountants do, as a graduate in commerce. But after about 5 years, I actually felt that I had a bit of entrepreneur spirit that I needed to satisfy. And I opened up my own practice and progressively started initially from a bedroom at home, then eventually with Shannon Naylor after nearly 40 years with some 20-odd staff operating within the practice.
Right.
And so, Elaine, over that period of time, I have seen an experience, and luckily sometimes at some cost, but nonetheless, it has always been a pleasure and a learning experience, because you never stop learning, of course. And as such, Elaine, the account experience that I've gained simply through association with my clients, with other business people, has been immense. And I have seen what goes right, and I have seen what goes wrong, and hopefully have learned from those lessons to a point where most of the time we can get it right.
That's really intriguing. Yeah, continue.
Yeah. So, Elaine, the good thing about my early corporate life is that I got to understand what corporate life was all about. That is that it is far more detailed. You have a high level of accountability within corporate life. And I brought those experiences down to small businesses. And when you bring that into small businesses, you do elevate the accountability of a entrepreneur, and that speeds up the process of his growth and his development. And for that matter, and I should use the word they because it could be anyone. So from that perspective, I've managed to speed up the process and growth of many small businesses because I've applied some principles that I've actually learned in corporate life, but also evolved some practices and principles that allow the businesses to grow at a faster rate and profitably, might add. I can honestly say, and put my hand to my heart, Elaine, I think I have visited the insolvency practitioners about 5 times in the 40 years, which means most of my practices were sold or continue today.
Wow, that's really, really exciting, Sandro.
Yeah. So from that perspective, and I take pride in that. That the business that I've been involved in have been successful in that they were able to achieve whatever they needed to achieve, and sometimes as the entrepreneur themselves need to have obviously an idea of where they want to be and what they want to achieve in their businesses. I'm here to assist them to achieve those goals and to achieve it with some compliance, both from an accounting perspective and from a taxation perspective.
Right. That's really intriguing. Yeah, that's good. So in your view, how do you think the property market has changed from a finance and tax perspective since you started your career, your business?
Elaine, over 40 years, I have seen an immense change in tax. I have seen an immense change in the way the banking system supports the property development, and for that matter, businesses. From an accounting tax perspective, I've seen the introduction of GST. I've seen the introduction of capital gains tax. I have seen I've seen the introduction of franking credits. I have seen the changes in legislation with the way companies operate, with the way trusts operate. Enormous amounts of changes to the tax system, all about increasing compliance and ensuring that the government takes its fair share. I like to say it's a fair share of tax from.
Yes.
Some of us may not always think that it's a fair share, but
I agree with you. Yeah.
But governments do think that it's a fair share, and they take a fair share. I've actually seen, I believe, Elaine, from when I started, I believe governments take more tax out of the system, albeit that, as a percentage of GDP, they may suggest something different, but I honestly believe that the breadth and extent of taxes in Australia today are far more than they were 20 years ago, than they were 40 years ago.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So there's been a huge broadening of the tax system in so many ways. And look, some of that's been driven by ourselves because we demand more from governments, both at a social level, that is a social equity level. And as a result, governments, I think I've always said, they only get voted for handing out money, not for taking money. And as a result, governments, their policies, both persuasions, by the way, have had a tendency to take more tax to actually then redistribute it in some way. So I've actually believed there's been a larger tax cut today, and most possibly with the events of COVID that we've seen in the last 2 years, and the amount of stimulus that the government has put into the Australian economy, that there is a payback at some point in time, Elaine, and that will introduce another raft of taxes that will need to be considered by either party, either two major parties that will govern this country at some point in time.
Right.
From a finance perspective, Elaine, when I started, we had the Commonwealth Bank, which was owned by the Australian federal government, in fact, the Australian taxpayer. We had Victorian State Bank. They are all institutions that no longer exist, and yet they've been absorbed, or they are being publicly listed, and they are now commercial enterprises. I have seen the introduction of the banking regulation. I have seen the deregulation introduced by the federal Labor government in the form of Mr. Hawke, and how that was expanded and opened up the Australian banking system. And in more recent times, we would have seen the Royal Commission introducing another raft of legislation. And again, all about making the Australian banking system initially more competitive, which I don't believe ever happened, because we still have the four pillars, by the way. We've still got the four majors. That has no major foreign bank has ever introduced itself in Australia to compete against any of the majors.
Yes.
And look, maybe that's a good thing. I mean, given the population size of Australia, maybe they realise that the competition would only mean lower profits for them. And as such, the four majors have increased. Alan, I believe that in terms of finance, I think it's actually become harder, to be honest with you.
Has it?
And I only simply because the banks now, in terms of what they ask of an individual or a company in terms of supporting a loan application, is significantly more difficult. And that, again, is all about protecting the consumer, because we've had over the years a number of instances where maybe the banks haven't acted as well as they should have. And through regulation, the banks have had to tighten up their practices in terms of delivering what they needed to do. So, and that meant that they need to ask more questions. They need to dig further into a person's ability to repay a loan, and that's put it simply. But so from that perspective, I see maybe getting a loan somewhat more difficult, and as a result, more demanding on the consumer to actually supply the information that's required to support a loan application.
Even though the interest rate is at its lowest in history.
Look, the interest rate, Elaine, is not the issue here. It's the ability for anyone to repay a loan. I borrow $100 from a bank, the bank would expect me to repay it at some point in time. So its loss will be, its profit is the interest that charges you. Its loss is the loan that it can't recover. And from that perspective, it is very important. It sustains its ability to recover a loan first. And if it makes a profit, ultimately it needs to make a profit to stay, like any other business, to stay in business. Yeah. But if it's actually going backwards in terms of the money that's borrowing you, then that is very a short-term situation for a bank. It's not sustainable, of course.
Sustainable, yeah.
So yeah. So from that perspective, Elaine, I find that the banks will be more demanding today. Having also said that, because and that regulation, unfortunately, when you look at it a little bit closer, happens to be to the major banks, but then you have second-tier banks and maybe the likes of, dare I say, the Liberties of this world that seem to be outside of that regulation, but the interest rates are higher, but they are more appealing to possibly a borrower that doesn't have the ability to sustain or support a loan with the majors. And so we've seen this second tier of banking evolving through the likes of Liberty and what you would actually call second tier banking system evolving and also supporting the property development. There is a number of, now I've seen a number of private lenders coming out of the woodwork, and that is people have a flush with cash, want something reasonably secure. They don't like the volatility of the share market. Generally, project finance by its very nature is a short-term activity, and as a result, they can put their money in and knowing they'll get their money out, and particularly when you consider where the property markets come from and still achieving those returns, people feel far more comfortable investing in bricks and mortar than they do in maybe shares or other businesses where the volatility may be more. So enormous changes in finance, enormous changes in accounting and tax for property. But Elaine, I guess at the end of the day, it's actually added a further cost to a property development activity, because taxes has increased, regulation has increased. At times, interest rates have been certainly much higher than where they are today. In fact, Elaine, my concerns is whether we will ever be able to sustain 5% at any point in time, given property increases. And if you look at most economic charts, one would suggest, and that they constantly continue to show, that the cost of borrowing relative to our earnings has increased fivefold, and that becomes always a concerning aspect of borrowing in Australia. So,
and
Ellen,
there's the cost of regulation there, the cost of the red tape.
Undoubtedly, Ellen, undoubtedly, the cost of regulation has been quite substantial. Compliance comes with a cost, no doubt. No matter what we do, Elaine, we've placed compliance and regulation over many industries. We've demanded that as consumers. We've demanded that, but we also need to recognise that comes with a cost, and so I think we've seen that happening as well.
Yeah, and totally agree. I mean, that's why our banking system is so robust.
It is. In fact, it is probably one of the most robust banking systems in the world.
Yeah.
Even though by size our banks don't rate as high as some of the other global banks, but they always rate very highly in terms of their sustainability, profitability, and certainly the commerciality of their business activities.
Correct. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Sandro, yourself, what inspires you to continue to provide value in your tax profession?
Yeah, Elaine, I love this question. What inspires me, Elaine? What inspires me is a win, and let me elaborate a little bit more. The win to me is seeing clients achieve a positive result. That is that their experience of knowing me has been great. It's been a wonderful journey. They are better having known me than not knowing me. And I think that is so important to me. The joy I have of seeing young entrepreneurs starting from zero, growing into multi-million-dollar businesses, achieving great success is one of my achievements. I love to know it, and I like to think that I've been part of that success with them. Having seen retirees retiring on money they never thought they would ever have, Elaine, only because I've given them advice. And sometimes I'm a little bit concerned, Elaine, that everyone is hanging on to the advice I give and they follow it to the letter. And then what happens if I get it wrong? Luckily, I've had the experience behind me to actually get it right most of the time. No, I'm not saying I get it right every time, but I can say I've got it right most of the time. And that to me, Elaine, it is what drives me, is seeing the success of my clients, seeing their achievements, seeing their wealth increase far greater than had they not known me. And that's what drives me.
And also being part of a journey, you're seeing from where they started to where they are or where they're going.
It is. I love seeing that, Elaine. I've become friends with many clients. I still, even though I'm semi-retired, Elaine, I still keep contact with my clients, as I do with you, Elaine, and seeing them have their successes, still being able to mentor them, and still being able to provide that opinion, that second opinion, just to make sure that they're on the right track. And that to me, it means so much. The fact that they've gone out of their way to just make sure, Sandro, have I got this right? And to seek my advice, I find that humbling to me. So that's what drives me.
I totally understand. Even when I talk to my clients as well, I feel the same thing. It's not about the money. It's more about the transformation they're going through. Helping them.
Correct, Elaine. It's the trust that people put in you. Trust takes a bit of time to build up, Elaine. It can be destroyed in a few minutes. And I'd like to think that I've been building this trust up over 40 years. When I finally left Shannon Naylor, we had over 2,500 clients, many of them that I'd been dealing with for nearly 30, 40 years. So, Elaine, I've enjoyed the loyalty of clients, but I've also enjoyed, as I said, seeing their successes over that period of time.
Beautiful.